Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up. I put up 5 videos this month, which is better than the one that I put up in January, so progress there. First up, I did a comics roundup where I talked about the comics that I had read, mainly in November and December because I didn't really read a lot of comics in January. So check that out if you like comics and graphic novels at all. Then I posted a video talking about the ideas of being forgotten and being remembered, which was a response to Candace from Librarian Fan Mail, as well as a video that Hank Green put up on the Blog Brothers channel. You guys seem to respond really well to that. I love doing discussion videos on here because I feel like you guys always leave such great and interesting and thoughtful comments, so thank you very much for all of those comments. And then I did an announcement / Friday Reads video where I talked about some exciting things that are happening for me, as well as just general life things that have been happening. I went on vacation, so I talked about that for a little bit. One of the things I talked about in there is the fact that I'm now making videos for the Book Riot BookTube channel, so I will have a link down below to that channel if you haven't checked it out already. I put up videos every Wednesday on there. And then this past week I put up a book haul because I had received some books from friends and things like that. Yeah, I won't be doing a lot of book hauls because I'm not buying a lot of books these days, so enjoy the few that I do have for you guys. Now, in terms of books that I read this month, first I'm going to talk about Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi because I don't remember if I talked about this. I think I was reading this, or I was in the middle of it when I recorded my last wrap-up, so I'm just going to talk about this one really quickly. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. This was my first experience with Helen Oyeyemi. Helen Oyeyemi has this very magical realism style to her, and magical realism is something that can be very hit or miss for me, and for this one I enjoyed it, but not quite as much as everyone else seems to. I felt like a lot of this was very meta and very much like a commentary on literature and the literary world and things like that, and so a lot of this felt just like very insidery to me, and I felt like as someone who has like just very basic insidery information in terms of literature, literary devices, the literary world, all of those things, like I haven't studied those things, and so I don't know as much about it, so I felt like I was missing things. I felt like this was meant to be a very clever book, and I felt like this was an interesting exercise in book structure and character structure and what we perceive in a book and what actually is reality versus what's imaginary, things like that. So I felt like it was very interesting in those sense, but I felt like I had a difficult time with it personally. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because I was super into it and I was very intrigued by it, and I honestly had no idea what to expect out of it, but it was just hard. This was a hard book for me. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think the difficulty of it made it less enjoyable. Then I read Almost Famous Women by Mayhew Bergman. This is a collection of short stories, and I got a copy of this from my local library. I actually did a review on this, so you guys can check that out if you guys are interested. The next book that I finished was Mr. Kiss and Tell by Rob Thomas. This is the second book in the Veronica Mars series, and I listened to this as an audiobook. I liked this, but I didn't like this quite as much as I liked the first book. It may partially be because Kristen Bell doesn't narrate this one and she does narrate the first one for the audiobooks. But once I got past that, I still really enjoyed the story. I think there are aspects of this that are really great. There's a lot more Logan and a lot more Weevil, so if those are characters that you really like in Veronica Mars, then check this one out because there's a lot more of them as opposed to the first book. But I felt like the mystery itself was a little bit weaker in this book, so I felt like it was kind of just like a toss-up. Like the mystery is stronger in the first book, but you get more of the characters that you love in this book, although I was a little bit sad that there wasn't a whole lot of Wallace. Wallace is my favorite. The next book that I finished was X by Ilyasah Shabazz. This book came out in January and it follows the life of Malcolm X during his younger years. It's approximately from like teenage years up until he's about like 26-ish. This is a young adult novel, and the story doesn't necessarily go chronologically. You do jump in time a little bit, so you're seeing aspects of him when he's a little kid, then you jump a little bit ahead, and then you jump back and you jump around. One of the things I really liked about this book is the fact that it covers an aspect of Malcolm X's life that I feel like isn't very much talked about. I feel like a lot of people talk about his life once he became, you know, the activist and the civil rights leader and all of those things, but this does a really good job of sort of explaining what his childhood was like and the experiences that he had gone through and why he ended up sort of making the choices that he ended up making when he was an adult. This is a fictionalized version of his life, but since this is written by Malcolm X's daughter, you can take it with, you know, that amount of authority. Another thing that I really enjoyed about this book is the fact that it doesn't try to make Malcolm X into any sort of like hero type. It's very honest about the choices that he made, the mistakes that he made, and the fact that he didn't live a perfect life or anything by that means. It's very just real about the way that he lived his life and the way that he grew up. Then while I was on my vacation, I ended up finishing March, the graphic novel series by John Lewis. I read both volumes 1 and 2. I am not going to talk too much about this because I actually recorded a review on these that will be going up this week, so you guys can look forward to that, but in general, I liked it. The next book that I ended up reading was Sweethearts by Sarah Zarr. I really just wanted to read a contemporary young adult book, so I picked this one up. It was actually a gift from Christy from One Book More. This book follows these two characters named Jennifer and Cameron. They were really good friends when they were little kids in elementary school. They were both kind of like outcasts, so they kind of clung to each other. And then one day Cameron moves away, and then you jump forward to when they're in high school and Jennifer has sort of redone her life. She ends up moving to a new neighborhood, and then she ends up becoming sort of like one of the popular girls, things like that, and then Cameron moves back into town and things really change. Now that is the premise that I picked up on for this book, but this book actually has a lot of really deep and dark themes. It discusses a lot of things that I don't normally see in young adult books, specifically being an outcast, having depression, abuse, difficult family situations, things like that. All of those things are talked about and explored in this book, but my problem was I felt like they weren't explored deeply enough. There are parts of this book that are very idealistic, but at the same time there are other parts that are very realistic, so I appreciated this book for discussing the topics that it does discuss, because I feel like it's something that wasn't expected, especially with a book named Sweethearts and like a cookie, a sugar cookie on the front. Like I felt like this is very misleading to the way that this book is actually written. I have another book by Sarah Zarr that I'm very excited to read because I feel like her writing is pretty well done in terms of young adult books, contemporary young adult books that I've read. So yeah, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars as well because I liked it, but it didn't quite go deep enough for me to really fall in love with it. The next book that I finished was Funny Girl by Nick Hornby. This is Nick Hornby's latest release, and I got this one from the library as well, so I can't hold it with my hands. This story takes place in the 1960s, and you are following this actress as she moves from like their small town in England to London to sort of make it big, and it just follows her career. She ends up starring on a major sitcom, and it just follows like her and her co-stars and the other people that she works with, their lives over the course of a couple of decades by the end of the book. I liked this book, but I didn't really love it. I think if you like Nick Hornby's writing style and you like Nick Hornby books in general, this might be worth picking up for you, but don't go in with too high expectations. I think Nick Hornby tries to do too much with this book. The parts of it that I really loved were sort of like the one-on-one conversations, or even just like the conversations in general that happen in this book. I think he is really good at writing like really dry British humor or really like quippy back and forths. There are parts of this that remind me a lot of TV shows like Extras, where they kind of do that behind the scenes type of thing and they make commentary on the television industry and the culture around it. Nick Hornby also does a little bit to sort of like make commentary on like 1960s culture and stuff like that, but I feel like it's all a little bit too idealistic, sometimes a little heavy-handed. I felt like because he was trying to cover so much as well, it all felt very surface level and you don't really get to go as deep as I would personally like. I think there's a lot of like really interesting relationships that are set up in this book that I think would have worked better as just like a single novel about that relationship, or even maybe just like 2 of those relationships as opposed to like all of the different ones that are explored in here. So in the end, I liked the book because it's very well written, it's very easy to get through in terms of like you're interested in what's happening, but I think that Nick Hornby just was trying to do too much with this book and it fell a little bit short of what I usually love in Nick Hornby books. And then the next book that I finished was On Immunity by Eula Biss. This is another one that I recorded a review on, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but this is a nonfiction book that covers the topic of vaccinations, and I really love this book. This probably was my favorite read of the month. I think that Eulabis does a really great job of covering the topic of vaccinations without it becoming too dry. She writes this as like a collection of essays, and so she talks about her own life and her own experiences of being a mother and raising a child and having to deal with the idea of vaccinations and things like that. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it. Even if you're not someone who normally reads nonfiction, I think this would be worth picking up because it's very easy to read, it's pretty short, and I feel like the personal aspects that Eulabis brings into it makes it much more readable than like a medical history textbook type of thing. And then the next book that I finished was The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. This book. I have mixed feelings about this book, and I feel like that's just the way I'm going to always feel about Donna Tartt novels now. The story follows a young boy named Theo who at the beginning of the story ends up experiencing this major tragedy with his mother, and he ends up losing his mother, and then he moves in with like a friend. You just follow his life from that point forward. I started this book really enjoying it. I think I read like the first 300 pages in like a couple of days because I was so into the storyline. I really like Donna Tartt's writing style. I think she's a very good writer, but I think in terms of plot, there's some editing that could have been done in this book. This book takes place in a couple of different cities, and the first place, it starts in New York City and it first moves to Las Vegas. When that move happens, my interest level just completely dropped. It's not so much like I hit Las Vegas and I was like, oh, I don't like Las Vegas, so I'm not gonna like this part of the book. But I went into it with such high expectations, or I was really enjoying it, and then as I kept reading along in the Las Vegas sections, I just got less and less interested. I really don't like Boris, like, at all. So anytime Boris was on the scene, not enjoying it. And I feel like there are too many drunken / drugged up scenes in this book. Theo has to deal with like the tragedy of his mother, and he's sort of working through that throughout the entire book. He relies a lot on like drugs and alcohol to help him get through just like day-to-day stuff sometimes, and there are so many scenes where it's just about Theo being drunk or Theo being on drugs, and I understand what you're trying to convey with that, but at the same time, we don't need so many of them. I didn't enjoy this book as much as everyone else seems to. I think it's worth like a 3 out of 5 stars for me personally, just because the writing is really strong, and I think there are certain sections that I just really adored. But I also think this is a book that really could have been edited down quite a lot, especially when it is such a chunker. But you know, that's just me. And then the final book that I read this month was A Long Division by Kisi Lamon. This was an interesting book, and I just finished this last night, so I feel like I'm still processing it. There are 2 storylines that are sort of happening in this book that are kind of interconnected. The first one takes place in 2013, and you're following this boy named City who takes place in this sort of like nationwide quiz spelling type competition, and he ends up going to like the major regional televised version of it, and it has like a major meltdown on the stage, and he becomes like a YouTube sensation sort of thing. And then City ends up getting this book named Long Division, and the second timeline sort of thing is the book itself, and in that book there's a boy named City, but this one takes place in like 1985, and there are like time travel aspects within that book. This book is complicated, so I'm having a hard time talking about it because I feel like there's so much that happens and it's kind of convoluted sometimes, so it's hard to talk about it without just like overtly spoiling things. So I'm gonna kind of just leave it at that. And so I feel like my inability to talk about it kind of just reflects how I feel about the book in general. There are aspects of this that are so well done. I think this book is just so great at doing commentary in terms of race relations and even just societal things that are true about the world that we live in and the way that we act and the way that we act with each other. I think this book is very realistic in terms of the way that its characters are written, because City is this young black boy growing up in Mississippi, in like a post-Katrina Mississippi. He's only like 16 years old, I think, in this book, and so I think the author does a really good job of reflecting the truth of being a 16-year-old boy in modern day, being black, living in the South, all of those things. Like, he does such a good job of capturing that voice and that lifestyle and the things that they would and wouldn't be interested in, and their complicated feelings towards other kids and their family members and all of those things. Like, those parts A+, really well done. The parts that were hard for me was just following the different timelines. Like, I think this main storyline, the 2013 storyline, could have been a book all to itself, and I think the sort of meta storyline that was happening with the book within the book could have been a story all to itself that explored different topics. I think this book does a little bit too much, which now that I'm saying that, I feel like is like a theme of the books that I read this month. They're all books that do good things, but they try to do too much, and so they fall short. Really, it's just, there's a lot happening in this book, and I felt like this book could have been so much stronger if it just like tightened it up a little bit, and it could have been such a stronger story. But I think I'm just a person who enjoys much more streamlined stories, and when you're doing too much, it takes away from the main points you could be making in the book. Again, I liked it. Don't take my criticisms to mean that I ever don't like a book, but I think that this book could have just been so much stronger. Like, there were a lot of times where I was reading this and I was just like, holy crap, the way that you are writing sentences and the way that you are talking about people's feelings or people's thought processes, or just the way people look at each other, all of this stuff is just so well done. But I felt like there was just way too much plot happening, and it was getting a little bit too messy at certain points that made it really hard for me to really love this book the way that I think I could have. So yeah, that was my February. If you've read any of the books that I have talked about, feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know what you guys thought of it. I know a lot of people really liked or really love a lot of the books that I read this month, so feel free to talk about that down in the comment section. I always love hearing opinions of other people who don't necessarily think or read the way that I do and see something that I don't necessarily see. Or if you have any questions about any of the things that I read this month, feel free to leave that down in the comment section as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching.